Hello everybody, Miles Kessler here. Welcome to our second of two community calls that I'm doing together with my old friend and teaching buddy, Patrick Cassidy. And we're speaking, the theme of these two calls was the Dharma of Aikido. And last, in part one, we spoke about that, the Dharma of Aikido. And today's theme is slightly different, although it's really the same. But the title is specifically Aikido and Non-Duality. Today's call will go for about 60 minutes, and then Patrick and I'll talk a little bit, and we'll open it up for Q&A, and maybe even do a few practices together. So, yeah, Patrick, how are you doing?
Very good, very good. Just got back from a trip to Japan, which was really very fruitful and enjoyable, and nice to be back. It had been more than 15 years since my last visit, so it was,
is that right? Wow.
Yeah, so it was very good. And a lot of stimulation about, what Aikido is, visiting Hambu Dojo and having a chance to train there, and in Doshu's class, and visiting Takeda's dojo as well, Yoshinobu Takeda's dojo in Kamakura. And, our exploration in the seminars we do, and the online work and the discussions that have been coming up, the nature of Aikido, and coming back and touching back on the the traditional holding place of Aikido back in Japan and Hambu Dojo, and they just brought up a lot of questions, and really on clarifying what it is that I feel inspired by, what are we actually talking about, and how important it is that as we open up to these bigger questions, it's not a denial of the tradition or the past of where we're coming from, but it's actually supported very much in the traditional teachings that come from Sensei, as well as the context of Asia in a totality, in Buddhism, Taoism, and these non-dual and spiritual perspectives that Aikido actually was cradled in when it was born. And so it's been a very positive, reflective time since during the trip and after, and I'm feeling very inspired to be able to kind of explore these themes with you tonight, and in the seminar that we'll be doing in May.
Yeah, me too. I mean, it's very much a continuation of the same. I mean, we approach these differently every single time, and Patrick and I always have the same thing. We get together for a seminar, usually a day or so in advance, and we hang out and we talk about what we're going to do and how it's going to be, and then we start and we do something completely different. But what we do, afterwards, you look back and it's such a clear process that we go through, and it's like the approach. I guess all that talk kind of sets us off from a certain specific approach, and then it unfolds in its own organic way, which is very much analogous to the Aikido process.
Yeah.
We can control and repeat techniques, etc., which is to a certain extent we want to learn. That's part of our curriculum that we learn. But the Aikido process itself is not. It's not a repetition of techniques. The Aikido process itself is kind of an emerging resolution of separation.
Right.
And what emerges is wholeness, and that's very much generally the topic of what we're going to talk about today, which is Aikido and non-duality. Non-duality.
Non-duality. Yeah.
Do you want to start off by saying something about that, or shall
Sure.
I?
I mean, what you just said right now is, I think, very apropos, and with regards to that ability to be in that state of creative flow, spontaneous creative flow, is that in how we engage in the teaching process and opening up to working together in the seminar is analogous, as you were saying, to the Aikido process itself. And that, I think, is basically linked with the perspective of Aikido, and the fact that we're hoping to be in harmony with our environment, in harmony with the other in the midst of a conflict situation. So being in harmony requires a certain kind of state of unity, connection. If there's separation, that separation limits our capacity to be in a state of harmony. And so that, just by virtue of the fact that Aikido is trying to approach that, it's pointing to the need or the doorway of actually being in a state of some level of unity with the other in the moment. And that unity is a movement towards the realization of what is happening. That's, this whole event is fundamentally one event, and that's a movement. So there are two ways of approaching this, and I think we both recognize the developmental nature of becoming more available, closer, and connected with the other in the practice, being able to learn how to blend with the other, learn how to be available to the other, learn how to include the other. And by doing so, we become more in touch with the movement of the other. We become more engaged as a system together, as a complete and unified system between self and other. And we start to come into contact with the nature of that relationship. Then there's also the realization of non-duality, the realization that actually we exist in a context already that is fundamentally universally whole and complete. And that can be realized through a meditative experience or a shift in consciousness or a teaching that we receive from a teacher. And suddenly we're in touch with the fact that we are part of an unfolding event and we're not separate from that unfolding event. And when this developmental kind of linking with the other and the realization of that unity come together, we start to actually are able to embody that kind of unity between self and other. And that embodied unity for me is where Aikido was born. It's the realization, not only conceptually, but an embodied expression of being fundamentally in one with the environment, one with the other, one with the relationship that we are in, even in the midst of conflict. And that's, I think, where Aikido is attempting to bring to a more conscious level. There was a very interesting quote that I just read this morning from a teacher, Jae No, and he made a comment that that is actually, so it's quite simple, but I think it's very important. It's the first link towards moving to this realization of non-duality, is that we often think that we have consciousness or we have some form of consciousness is an attribute of who we are, and that we want to try to expand consciousness or grow consciousness or somehow develop the consciousness to a greater state. And he says this is kind of a false approach, because actually it's not that we have consciousness. It's not something that we possess. It's actually what we truly are. We are the movement of consciousness itself. And that realization, that dissolving of the limited identity and the realization that we are actually a field of consciousness, starts to open up that experience of being unified with the moment around us. And that can open us up to what I feel is potentially there in the world of Aikido, the realization of unity in the midst of apparent conflict, apparent separation. So there's this kind of dual nature of experiencing conflict and at the same time a realization of a continuous context of unity that is experienced in meditation, but also can be developed and explored in the practice of Aikido itself. And I think there's that nature and that ability to develop that consciousness, to appreciate that unity and the realization of that unity, is something where meditation and Aikido start to come together as one fundamental approach, and where meditation and Aikido can support each other. And that's a big aspect of both your work and my work in the in how we teach is the importance of approaching this question from both not only the practice in community, but also the solo approach within the field of meditation and contemplation. So I don't know if I'm making myself clear or not. How are you feeling with what I'm saying?
Yeah. So maybe if I could have just take a run at this as well.
Please.
I mean, we've spoken about this a lot in the past,
Yeah.
but let me just lay out a few things. First, it's helpful to kind of, let's say, use the Buddhist perspective of absolute and relative. Relative being everything you see in the world, and in Aikido, it's the different styles, the different techniques, the different people, the different teachers. There was Sensei, and then there was everything else, and that's all relative. And just if we kind of couch that in Aikido terms for a second, even the beliefs in this principle is more important, or that technique's more important, or the philosophy, it's all relative. Good. Sometimes not so good, but basically, relativity is fine. It's all part of the stuff of the universe. So it is a thing. And then the absolute would be the non-dual nature, or the absolute state of emptiness. And in that, from the absolute perspective, there is no separation. From the relative perspective, it is only separation. And that's not necessarily a bad thing sometimes, but most of our human suffering is based on separation. And certainly all of our human conflict is based on, it only happens within that perspective of separation. So Aikido and non-duality, there's the non-duality, and then there's the relative. And I actually see Aikido as the process. Well, I mean, this is not one way to look at Aikido, is to see it's as the process that moves us from the relative, from separation, towards the absolute, or towards wholeness, or towards oneness, you could say. And excuse me, that very process is based on a dialectic. Dialectic meaning two opposing forces that kind of create a tension, or two opposing views, or two opposing people, or two things. There's always an excitement in the tension between self and other, and sometimes there's a lot of fear between the tension between self and others. There's the father and the child. There's the romantic tension that can come up between two people. There's somebody steps in front of you at the line in the market, creates tension, or somebody drives in front of you, or somebody has a different political view, or Donald Trump. Oh my God, all tension comes up, or if you're a Trump fan, then the tension comes up towards the left. That's just kind of, and it's part of reality. That's reality. Reality is relative, but it's not the absolute view of reality. So this tension, this dialectic, is something that we need to, in Aikido, that's really, as somebody who's walking the path of Aikido, a practitioner, is something we need to learn how to embrace, that we need to learn how to accept. Why do we need to learn how to accept? Because especially if it's stress and conflict, when that tension arises, everything in our system, all the alarms and bells and whistles go off to create more separation.
Sure.
Like Patrick mentioned, fight, flight, freeze. We want to either control that tension, the cause or the person that's causing that tension, or we want to escape it, to get away from it, or space out, fight, flight, freeze. But as an Aikidoka, as a practitioner, our job is to first accept it and know that that's our path. And then through a combination of skillful means, which is the technique, the relative techniques that we learn over the months, years of practice, through a combination of skillful means, technical training. Let's just say technical, it's much more than that, but let's just say skillful means, and staying open to, like Patrick was saying, the non-dual nature of reality. Reality that we see is already unified. It always is already unified. It's always already unified. We just don't see that. So somehow staying open, even if it's just an idea and an intention, staying open to that fact. And those two, in a way, I said Aikido is this when two forces that creates this dialectic, two opposing forces creates a dialectic tension. In a way, the relative and the absolute also create a dialectic tension. And the reason we don't see the unified nature of reality is because we're born into an egoic existence. We have a separate sense of self. But that separate sense of self can have the intention to kind of enter back into a different state. But there's nothing that separate sense of self can do to have a non-dual experience. If I can do Ikkyo 1,000,000 times and it won't take me any closer to a non-dual, to unity experience. It won't take me any closer towards wholeness. What does, there is kind of an inner pathway in Aikido that can help us ease towards that experience. And that's when we connect with principles rather than technique. Technique, we learn it's quite literally moving the deck chairs on the Titanic. It's just moving things around. You can get better and skillful at it, and that's all good. But those are relative. Those are separated, and techniques do create separation. Principles are universal. Principles are always universal. Principles of center, principles of ground, principles of listening, being open, allowing, principles of connecting. Those are universal. And what I mean by that is that the center in you, not the physical center, but that kind of capacity, that awakening to center in you and center in me is the same center. Connection in you and connection in me. The ultimate connection, the big connection, is the same connection. And from that, and if we even take that a little bit further, the Aiki-Kami, the spirit of the God of Aikido, the divine Aiki in you and the divine Aiki in me, it's the same. It's the same divine Aiki. And that's where you and I can actually begin to come. So the principles will lead us into that. Now, the principles together with the conflict also creates this dialectic. So it's anytime that we have this kind of tension, it can be between two people, but that's kind of external. I might be in a struggle with Mandy over there, and it's kind of external. But if I also include my interior, okay, who am I as I struggle, and what am I feeling, and staying open to that, and shifting out of fight, flight, freeze, survival into more kind of a grounded place, connecting with Mandy as she's doing the same thing, then we can act. The conflict will begin to enter into that process, the Aikido process, that starts to, in a way, self-liberate it. It will self-resolve. Now, why is it such a difficult thing to do? Because in conflict, we got triggers up and down all over the place. We're just like so quick to go in and want to control or be right or not back down or whatever. We all have our stuff. So like Patrick was saying, the contemplative path has to be a part of Aikido. If you're interested in a spiritual perspective, it has to be a part of Aikido if you're interested in Aikido and non-duality. And Patrick also mentioned that Aikido was born from a non-dual experience. That was it's from that. Sensei had that realization, and then suddenly he was expressing Aikido. Right. So in that sense, Aikido, not only is it this process that helps us move from separation to wholeness, and separation and wholeness is a non-duality. We don't want to say, separation is bad, wholeness good. Separation feels not satisfying. Wholeness is incredibly satisfying. But it's not to have a preference, separation bad, wholeness good, because that's dualistic. We have to include both. So it's the process that will lead us to that. But then when you are in some type of unity consciousness or perspective or unified field with others, the way that you organize quite naturally, the way that you move, the way that everything happens is also Aikido. That's kind of Aikido online expressive. Right. So in a way, it's you could say from a completely relative point of view, all the techniques and practices and different styles and teachings and teachers and all that stuff, that's Aikido, sure, but it's relative. The process that moves us from the relative into wholeness, that process is also Aikido. And then the unity consciousness, the actual wholeness itself, the non-dual perspective, whatever you manifest from there is kind of the maybe it's wrong to even say it's the fruit, but that's also Aikido. And all of that together is usually kind of the ground that we play in.
Right. I think what sparks me as you're pointing to the process of Aikido about bringing that ability to connect with the principles and to experience that wholeness as that oneness. In contrast with the realization of that unity, that ground of unity that can occur free from the practice of Aikido, and that I think is that dialectic that you were talking about. That being able to bring the realization or the understanding of unity into a very real experience in the midst of relationship, the dynamic of relationship and the pressure of relationship, and the recognition of the dual experience of unity and separation. Because even in the midst of unity, there's still life and the dynamics of life, the experience of being not only a unified one, or I'm not separate from the world around me, to actually having also a relationship between two people. And they're both, the mind doesn't grasp it, but it's the nature of our experience, both simultaneously. And Aikido is that bridge between that realization of no separation between you and I, and also the dynamic of that dynamic tension that can be experienced when we meet another person in the midst of conflict, and how to be able to stand on that bridge between the two and function. As Sensei said, that Aikido exists on the floating bridge between heaven and earth, the floating bridge between that absolute nature and the relative experience of being two, and how we function in that way where we're both experiencing. If we're grounded out into a more kind of everyday experience, we could look at the parent-child relationship, where the parent realizes that state of non-separation and that unity between myself and the other, based on love and the connection that exists in the family, and the dynamic of conflict that can exist between parent and child in a very real and strong way. And they're both fundamentally simultaneously there. The love is not touched by the conflict, and the love informs the parent on how to deal with the conflict, and the parent doesn't separate from the relationship as he deals with, or he deals with the conflict. And actually that unity informs the proper response for conflict. But most of the time in physical conflict, we are still bound by that idea. In order for myself to protect myself from the other, I need to separate. I need to see the other as being against. I need to approach the other as an enemy or a threat to my system. That's the way we're culturally conditioned. That's the way we're in
yeah, it's business as usual,
reactively conditioned.
Yeah.
And Aikido is providing that kind of doorway into another way of fundamentally functioning, but that's based on that non-dual perspective, as you were saying. And that non-dual perspective is one, I think, both realized and developed in the practice. Realized in the sense that it is the letting go, that momentary letting go of our holding patterns, and the realization of unity that can be experienced in Zen meditation or in Theravada and Vipassana meditation. Or
well, you realize the unity already is always there.
Exactly. Yes.
Yeah, in that sense, even though it's a waking up to it. Part of that waking up is like, oh, this is.
It's always been that way. Exactly. But the ability to embody that in conflict is a developmental stage. That's something that doesn't come with the meditative realization. Our triggers are still there. Those, when we get pushed, our bodies still react with a quality of this fight, flight, freeze.
Well, this is actually interesting what you're talking, because so knowing that that's the case, how we set up the context of how we train is super important.
Yes,
because we can just train to be better, faster, stronger, and you and I have trained, in that context, even in Japan. You can maybe even say, especially in Japan, but actually, I don't think Japan is unique in that sense. Every country is the same, every culture is the same. It is a human tendency, and much of most martial arts and a large amount of Aikido is thoroughly ensconced in that tendency to still kind of create separation.
Right.
So
As a
like
way,
you better,
as a
faster,
way to
stronger
get
technique.
advantage. As a way to get advantage.
Yeah, better, faster, stronger
Yeah.
technique,
Right.
but it doesn't bring you any closer to the spiritual dimension of the art.
No. Although sometimes I think, in my experience, sometimes, like you said, the principle, that universal nature of principles shows up. And sometimes in a technique, you'll get a hit of it.
Totally.
You'll get, there's something there. And I think
Right.
that's what's so seductive about the practice of Aikido at that initial stage. As you're practicing techniques, you're getting these flavors of those universal principles. And you think they exist in the technique, but they're echoes of them in the technique, and they don't not always there, but sometimes they show up, and you go, this is really what I'm in touch with. This is really what I want to
Right.
get.
And the feeling is, hey, I got that. That sense of unity or that sense of flow
Right.
exists in that technique. But the
Yeah.
actual reality is that
Yes.
technique exists in that flow.
That's right. Yeah.
And if you keep trying to repeat, let me go back and do Ikkyo to get back in the flow, it might happen. It could happen,
Yeah. Right.
But that's actually not the way it is.
No, the techniques arise out of that unity. The unity isn't a product of the technique.
It's an expression. Sorry, the technique's an expression of that unity. When you look back and you say, oh yeah, well it was kind of Ikkyo.
Yes,
and
exactly.
And it was a cool Ikkyo because it didn't, I didn't have to make much effort, and it was totally effective, and the other person loved it.
Right. And I wasn't repeating it. That wasn't where it was coming from. It was emerging out of a unified experience.
So in every sense of the word, there's a sense of unity towards the end. The so-called Nage felt, I didn't have to go out of myself at all to that. It was a perfectly authentic expression of who I am. The so-called Uke feels like, well, that's exactly what I wanted to do. Right. I was playing a role there, but wow, that's exactly how I wanted to come out of this. And wholeness is maintained.
Right. And there's no space for the ego to come in and take ownership of the event, because if there's a strong reflection on it, you can't say that you did it. It's like you were there, you were opening, it happened, and in the moment, the whole event created itself, and you were collaborating with it. But to take ownership of it means you separate from the dynamic, and you're starting to take ownership of something that actually is.
Well, yeah, in that sense, it's radically impersonal.
Yeah.
But it is very easy. I mean, I don't disagree with you. I think you agree with what I'm going to say. It is easy and almost expected for the ego to step in afterwards and say, well,
after.
Look at me. Yeah, right. After. Yeah.
Right, after. But if you're really
good.
Did you see that?
Right. Let me do it again. Oh.
But if you really confront yourself and you're sober with yourself, you realize that you can't take responsibility for it, because that fundamental nature of our experience, that decision-making nature of our control, isn't the one that's implemented. We're not in a
completely impersonal.
And it arrives in this kind of spontaneous fashion, which is an extraordinary experience. It feels more like a gift than it does a product of our work, but a gift of something that arises out of an absolute nature of who we are. And that absolute nature, as you said, is shared by us both. It's shared with Uke, it's shared with Nage, and that's our whole response is being supported by that field, that context.
Right.
So it's very difficult to kind of plant a flag and say, okay, this is what I did, when the whole context is giving birth to everything, and you're part of that. You're part of that.
Yeah, and likewise, it's impossible to plant a flag and say, I'm going to do non-duality. I'm going to do you can't. You can do a lot to set up the conditions.
Yeah.
And then just allow the process, and pay attention to our internal triggers. Sure. And not only that, and this was also I find very interesting, and what's so beautiful about Aikido is that, the more we learn about our own internal triggers, we kind of start to understand that, well, first we understand everybody's got them, but then we also get when other people are being triggered, and we don't pour more fuel onto their triggers. we give them space and say, yeah, brother, yeah, sister, I'm going through this too, and then we keep practicing one way or the other. Right. the trigger intensity starts to slow down, starts to relax a bit, and then something completely different can shift and turn into this wholeness.
We start to take the triggers impersonally. We no longer because as we depersonalize the triggers, we start to recognize that we all share the same nature.
Yeah.
As the universal principles are universal, so are the triggers universal. And then that removes us from that kind of personal victim relationship to our own triggers, thinking that I'm the only one whose faces fear, or I'm the only one who deals with contraction or hesitation, or
excuse me.
Go ahead.
Pardon. No, I was yawning. I was going to say it's quite part of the human experience. I mean, it's part and parcel of the human experience. Yes, exactly. Well, Patrick, what do you say? I mean, look, we got about 15 minutes left of the main part of today's call. Do you want to just first let me offer for anybody, if you have any questions or anything you'd like to get more clarity on, or anything you would like to add, you can raise your hand. You can either do it like that. We can probably see everybody on the call today, or if you want to push the button. Beneath your screen, there's I think it's a participants button. You click that, there'll be a window on the right side that'll open up, and then your hand will go up. Mandy's hand is already up. You can also see, if you look at Mandy's picture, you can see there's a little blue box with a white hand up there. So that's how, so if you do have something, just put your hand up and we will get to you. And, while we go to Mandy, we take her question. If something comes up for you, just raise your hand and let us know. Yep. Okay. Is that cool, Patrick?
That sounds great.
All right, Mandy, your mic is open. Your mic's open.
Hello, Mandy.
Hi, Patrick. How are you? Hi, Miles.
Very good. Very good.
Last week in Nadeau Sensei's class, and he's getting ready for his Sensei retreat. So we were, he told us we were guinea pigs last week. So that being what it was fun.
Well, you guys are guinea pigs for the seminar that we're going to be giving in Riviera. So.
But one of the things that really became clear, it was a big insight, and that was that tension, is, or conflict, like here, is just energy, energy that is constrained by the ego or the identity, but it's a constrained energy, and that's it's not allowed to free flow. Once it's like tension, release, and then where then you follow it wherever it's going. And that I felt before, but never had a real understanding of it. As tension is energy that's constrained. And if constrained by, who you are, what you're going through at the time, whatever. But it's, if you allow it to flow, it just, we were in the middle of a technique, and I had moved in correctly, and it just kept going. I just went with the flow of the energy the other person was giving me. It turned into a whole other technique. And Sensei came over and said, "Can you do that again?" And I said, "No." And he said, "Good." And then he walked away. But it's things like that that happen that make you realize that something else is at work. With you, through you, and you're a part of it, but you're not it. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Totally makes sense. I think it's a sense of Richard. We'll get to you, Richard. That was Rich. Yeah, I'll open your mic in just a second. It's from one perspective, we do Aikido, but then as we make that shift to the point where you were talking about Aikido, quite literally, Aikido does us.
Mm.
Yes.
We it's the tension of that conflict. It's a very simplistic way to say it, but it's the tension of that conflict moves us into harmony. And now we have to be in a very specific space for that to happen. But yeah. And you can't, and Patrick will agree with this, you can't determine what you're going to do before that.
Right. I mean,
you can't say, here's the tension, here comes old so-and-so, I'm going to do Ikkyo. I mean, if you do that, you just repeat more tension, basically. Doesn't but if you stay really open, it may be Ikkyo and it may be something completely new, completely different. Well, it's always, the sensation is always new, but it probably won't be anything you could have imagined. It's always creative and it's always spontaneous.
And that requires a lot of ability to let go and in a certain degree of faith.
I was thinking that, yes.
That your system is going to be able to function from that larger ground of being, and even to a certain degree an ability to deeply suspend that judgmental nature of what's going on, to allow for something to come up which may be different than what we've expected, different than what we consider to be right or wrong, and for us to engage in a movement that we are actually becoming. We're surprised by our own response in a certain way.
Right.
Because there's no thought there. There's no, in fact, Sensei's always taught us, no, when you're present, when you're in the moment, thoughts, judgments, criticism, whatever is suspended.
Yeah, there's no mind.
It's like, swiped off the desk of your, your awareness.
Or at least it's in the back seat.
Yeah, it's way in the back seat. And and then later on, you can have all the thoughts and judgments and whatever about it that you want to, but in the present, no, you're just in the present, feeling the flow.
Yeah,
and that's.
I would even go a little bit further with this, Mandy. It's not that you're in the present feeling the flow. You are present and flow.
Yeah.
You are present and flow. Yeah. There's really it's unified, and it's something Patrick and I also teach quite a bit. Then you actually, it's very weird because it's a it's non-egoic. It's not. It's highly impersonal, but there's a certain agency of flow that you can align with. And in a way give a little bit of direction to the flow. If you go in too heavy with that, it closes the flow down. But you can actually surf with some, I don't know what to say, unified agency. I mean, agency really is kind of, the ego says, I'm going to do that. That's not what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
But you can align as part of that evolutionary potential. You can actually align with that.
It's a collaboration with a mystery. And that mystery is fundamentally intelligent and reflects in our experience. And it's like dancing with an invisible partner. We can feel the invisible partner, but it's not fundamentally an object that we have in our consciousness. It's not another thing to manipulate, but it's the context on where the moment is emerging, and that context is intelligent and informs the whole moment. It's somehow surfing it, as Miles said, or opening and realizing we are that flow state, we are that consciousness state. We have the gift of collaborating with it. I think that's the way I experience it. It's the gift of that appreciation of the miracle that we're experiencing. And for me, that's really one of the beautiful things of Aikido.
Well, listen, Mandy, is it okay if I go over to Richard to open up his mic?
And thank you.
Thank you very much. And Richard, your mic is open. Richard?
Hi, Miles. Can you hear me?
Hello.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes. Hi, Miles. Hi, Patrick.
Hello, Richard.
Hello. I was really interested in what you were saying about faith in your system and faith in Aikido, really. I think on the aspects of non-duality, if we accept that we are attempting to reach that for ourselves, but we have to accept that the other person with the aggression isn't necessarily wanting to do that themselves.
Right.
I think as long as we accept that, then we can set ourselves on a course of how we want to deal with conflict.
Right.
And with the faith in our Aikido and our skill, that it's very easy to react. Maybe I see this in my students, and they will react to the person rather than the anger or the aggression. And I think once you're using Aikido towards the anger of a person and allowing it to dissipate, not necessarily in one technique but many, then there may be a chance for non-duality in both.
Could you say something a little bit more about
resolution?
Richard, could you say something more about that in terms of responding to the anger? Because I'd like to know a little bit more exactly what you're referring to there. I think,
for instance, when I see a student do an Ikkyo to a Munizuki strike, and they're pinning down, and they feel that the technique's complete, it's finished because I have beaten the person, they are down, they're finished. Whereas I don't feel that. I feel that until the anger's dissipated, the technique, if I feel tension, I feel aggression still through the person, that technique needs to move to allow the aggression to dissipate until, and you do see it in Sensei,
right?
When he simple things that he does, where he will take one Ikkyo, not fully down, but then into another Ikkyo or an Ikkyo, until you see the person's resolved, their aggression's resolved.
So you're pointing to
thoughts on that?
You're pointing to paying attention to a more subtle marker of what's happening on, and not that it's not just moving the physical body, but you're actually asking your students to look at resolving that underlying tension that is experienced in the relationship and addressing that tension, whether it's anger or whatever it may be. Is that what you're saying?
Yes. Yeah, definitely. That's
Yeah. So in other words, it's not complete until there's a sense of satisfaction from a wholeness from both people. Yeah.
Certain kind of return to a state of balance in the relationship, a certain kind of realization coming back.
And I feel that's very important to allow my students to understand that principle. So that when they
absolutely,
when they're defending themselves, they're looking to dissipate the anger.
Sure. So what you're pointing to is very important, because that for me would be the direction I would align my intelligence with. Is not the physical movement of the individual to a particular position on the ground or a throw or some physical expression of a movement that I want to do, but I want to be paying attention to the nature of the relationship. And if I can get the nature of the relationship back to a state of balance before I have to throw a person, or even before I make contact with the person, physical contact with the person, that would be far more effective than having to throw a person. If you're you're paying attention to that, that's actually that's a great thing to point out to your students. That's very cool.
Yeah. Excellent.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah,
for
Richard,
sharing.
thank you for sharing. It's beautiful. Yeah.
Nice.
I tell you what, we're coming up to the end of the hour, but Martine, you had your hand up and now it's down. Do you still have a question? Yes, she does. Okay. So I tell you what, since we're kind of at the hour, if somebody does have to leave, sorry, I'm sorry about the noise, everybody. It's family life. No, it's our dog. She's something's going on there, but she's okay. Maybe we'll just make a few announcements.
Sure.
One announcement, really, and then we'll for those who can stay, we'll continue on with this kind of open dialogue here. So basically, this is the second of two calls on the Dharma of Aikido. This call was on Aikido Non-Duality, and I'd set these up for a yearly event that Patrick and I do together. That he organizes. He hosts me in Montreal. Patrick, you want to say something about it?
Sure. It's our yearly Riviera Seminar, and the theme of the event is non-duality in the midst of conflict, and specifically, what we've been discussing today. And really, the event. This is our I think our 13th year of doing it, and we
13. Wow.
Yeah, it's pretty impressive, and it's a wonderful mix. Many of the members of the Integral and Evolutionary Aikido tribe come together, and we practice for the weekend. And we have a follow-up event on Monday called One Taste, which is a more of a contemplative, embodied approach with some meditation and a little bit more dialogue and exploration along the spiritual perspective, and where the weekend tends to be a little bit more Aikido based and fundamentally focusing on the embodied exploration within the context of Aikido. And we have if you're interested, there is a Facebook page with information on it, the Riviera Seminar 2018, as well as we have a website, the rivieraseminar.com, with all the information. And if you're feeling inspired to join us, we do have a reduced fee prior to May 1st, which you can benefit from if you contact us and let us know you're coming. We'll send you all the information. So either on the Facebook page or rivieraseminar.com, you can find all the information for the upcoming event, May 18th to the 21st. So the Friday to Sunday will be the seminar, and Monday will be the explorative, contemplative one-day teaching that Miles and I do after the Aikido weekend. So yeah.
Yeah, sorry, Patrick. Go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead.
I didn't mean to cut you off.
I
would just say that this is one of the most unique Aikido seminars that you'll do. I'm not saying it's better or whatever. It's just, for sure it's different. And Patrick and I, techniques happen, but we don't teach techniques. We just enter into it's one full weekend of Dharma, deep process with great people, great. You could say community, but you can also say Sangha, because Sangha is the idea that you put spirituality or awareness or the intention towards unity in the center of the gathering, and magic happens over the weekend, and not just in in the inner space and the outer space. It's it's right there on Lake Leman, which is beautiful. It's just a beautiful region in the world. Beautiful people come from all over Europe and also North America. Yeah, they come from the States, other places as well, I guess. And it's just a great event, and we'd love to have you with us.
Absolutely. Yeah. And if you can handle all multilingual translations, then you'll have we have a good contingent of Germans, Italians, and French speakers, all trying to bridge the gap together.
Yes, Anyway, so I will when I send the recording, I'll send a mail with the recording to this video or to this session community call. I will also put something about the Riviera Seminar in there. So if you remember the rivieraseminar.com, go check that out. Otherwise, you'll get that information from me. So
Excellent.
okay, we would love to have you with us. Martine, do you want to jump in? Your mic's open. Oh, I can't hear you. Hang on. It seems like there's something not plugged in. There we go.
Martine?
No.
No, still not.
Can you hear me?
There
Now
we
we can
go.
hear you.
Okay. Forget the phones.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, I would love to be at that seminar someday. So yeah, well, actually, you were saying magic happens at the seminar, and that's kind of what I was going to say. You know, when I think when when I'm in a space where people are attuned to that non-dual stuff, I get I attune more to it.
Totally.
And I think like when you were talking about not pouring more fuel onto the uke or the partner, the other, how we are and how we show up, the other person attunes to us.
Yeah.
In a way, the mirror neurons or the energy or whatever. And just being in that space helps the other. That's the technique, so to speak. I mean, it's not really a technique.
And it happens collectively too, because you get 40, 50, 60, 70, 80, 90 people entering that space, and it's exponential.
Right.
So it's so much easier to be in that space when you're around other people, right? Or the sangha, or even meditation when you're around other people. So I never thought about it that way, why it's so much easier to meditate when you're with a group. How good it feels sometimes when you have a teacher who is attuned, or you with a partner who's like that. It's so much easier to get there if you're conscious of that.
And to have that as a conscious context to share, to be able to dialogue about, to be able to bring out as the center of the practice, and to honor that field of shared intimacy and that field of shared flow and that recognition of unity that supports both individuals, to bring that into the central theme of a community or a practice is a very rare occurrence, and there's a tremendous amount of joy that comes from that, a tremendous amount of exploration, and it does feel like magic, because things do start showing up that the mind can't consciously or logically can't rationally draw any causal effect for these things happening. There's this kind of synchronous experience, this synchronicity that rises up in the room, and it can be experienced in the Aikido itself. And when that occurs, there's this sense of like my individual consciousness is one wave on a larger ocean that is supporting every wave, and that wave, although seems separate from me, is actually not separate at all. And that delight that comes from that experience of being in unity, and at the same time also experiencing the differences between the two individuals at the same time is for me, Aikido really starts to percolate and be creative in that experience. And so yeah, I think the pointing out of the magic that comes from that is really a beautiful thing. I appreciate that joy that comes from that experience very much.
what's helpful is this is the language to talk about it, other than, oh, it just feels good and this happened. No, after Aikido, we all feel great. Yeah, it feels practice, but here's the language to talk about it. And
like because that language isn't, sorry, that language isn't part of our culture. So in a way, we have to kind of create a new way to interpret this experience.
Cool.
Yeah.
I think Mandy was talking about this, when we align this, or we were speaking about how it moves through us. Yeah. Instead of me doing the technique does me in a way. And sure, with 1-2 people, it's an amazing experience. But when it starts to kind of exponentiate or whatever you say, it becomes more of a collective, then there's really this kind of this unity consciousness, this unified field starts to really kind of land, and you really literally feel you're walking into a unified field. And then that field has that field, and I think therapists, especially more of the intuitive based therapists, are working with that intuitive field. It is an intuitive field, but the unified, what did I call it? Unified field.
Unified field, yeah.
Which has, it is an intuitive field, and a connected field, and an intelligent field. And as you enter that, your own intelligence kind of begins to resonate and align with that too. It carries us as much as we, it needs us to emerge, but then it carries us as much as we kind of organize to. Jesus said that, when two people come together in my name, I will be there.
Right.
So, and we could say Aiki, the Aiki-Kami said, even I don't think he said that. When two come together in my name, the Aiki-Kami will be there. It's spirit. Spirit awakens.
Right. And I think it can be important to differentiate that the realization of that the unity of all life, the realization of non-separation, is something which is always there, has always been there, and will always be there. But the conscious recognition of that is that collective field that rises up in the moment. And when we become conscious of that, of our ground of being, that Dharma field of that supports all consciousness, then it suddenly becomes much more tangible. It becomes something that we start to actually have a collective experience with. That field that comes when people are actually tuning in to the reality, or tuning into that non-duality. Then there's a certain kind of tantric experience of Aikido, when actually we're bringing in the limitless nature of who we are into time and space. And that's actually a very subtle thing to recognize. And there's the conscious recognition of unity is not necessarily the unity. The unity is always there, but the conscious recognition of unity comes and goes dependent on the individuals involved. And so there's something about when the Sangha comes together and the consciousness, the consciousness of the Sangha becomes the field that we feel. That it's I'm not doing a very good job of expressing it. There's the recognition of that which is always here becomes available, and that becomes then consciously explorable. A little bit like the love we may feel for another person is always there, but until we become consciously available to it, we don't appreciate it in this moment. But when we appreciate it in this moment, it's like we're in touch with something which has always been there, but we start to actually collaborate with it, and the Aikido becomes a vehicle for that collaboration. Are you getting what I'm saying there, Miles? Or... Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, I'm just looking at the clock here. So I think that if anybody else has anything that they would like to share, question you'd like to ask, we can probably take one more, and then we will wrap it up. Morris, you're unusually quiet. You usually have a handful of questions. You do have a question?
Yes. Can you hear me?
Your mic's open.
Okay, I just didn't want to take everybody's time, but I had a question.
Not at all.
Yeah, no. Hi, hello to everybody. Now, when we are in that flow state, would it be something like that state without mind, or can mind come in as part of the flow state as well? For example, like we're in a technique. I mean, sorry, not technique. We're not in a technique. We're flowing in Aikido, let's say.
Mm-hmm.
And at one moment, I realized, hey, I'm flowing too much. Maybe it would be too good just to turn my hara a little bit here. And then I would be like in advantage or something.
Oh, yeah, you can do that.
And
It's kind of like dynamic steering.
Yeah, so it's like a thought coming in. It's a thought, so it disturbs a little bit the flow. But on the other hand, it's a thought that's part of the whole game, maybe. I mean, is that sort of okay?
If the thought's in the flow, it's okay. Yeah. If the thought, but mind can cut mind with a with a little m cuts down flow, but mind can be part of flow. Flow is not limited to just energy.
Energy, yeah.
Think of Einstein. I'm sure when he was figuring out his theories, highly intellectual, highly conceptual, highly abstract, but it had to be flow. He could do 12 hours. He could do that, and you got it. All mind.
Yeah. Yeah.
Patrick,
I think thinking only cuts the flow when it has an improper relationship to the moment.
Yeah, and that's nice. That's a nice way to say it.
That the thinking, when thinking takes a position of control and a decision making or ownership relationship to the flow or to the moment, then it starts to get in its own way. And so thinking is not a bad thing. It's just it needs to be regulated to what I would call a coach position rather than a controller. So it's not in the way of the process, but it's helping frame the process.
Great. Yeah. Thanks.
Nice question.
Yeah.
And I want to thank everybody who joined the call. And if you're watching the replay, thank you for tuning in. And if there's any chance that you can join Patrick and I for the Riviera Seminar, May 17, 18, 19, is that right, Patrick?
No, May 18th, 19th, and 20th. And then this extra day on the 21st.
Great. And you can find out all the information at the Riviera Seminar.com. One word, RivieraSeminar.com. And if you can't meet us there, then I'm sure we will meet you somewhere soon.
Yes, absolutely.
All right, everybody. Thank you so much.
Ciao, ciao, everyone.